Hungarian Folk Tales. The Slipper-Tearing Princesses. Once upon a time, there lived a king who had 3 daughters. Each of them wore and tore 12 pairs of slippers every single night. Finally, the king could not supply them any longer with footwear, so he issued a declaration across the land. He declared that anyone who could tell him where his daughters wore out their slippers every night would receive a very attractive payment as reward. The king had a young lad who worked as a shepherd. As he was grazing his flock of sheep one day, he suddenly decided to visit the royal palace. When he arrived, he told the king his reasons for coming. "Your Majesty, I shall find out where your daughters go every night." "All right, go ahead, and if you are successful, you'll get a rich reward." The king sent the shepherd boy to sleep in the same room where his daughters slept. The lad lay down on the floor with his bag and stick and pretended to be asleep. It was around midnight when he saw an old witch fly in through the window. She produced some kind of cream or ointment which the princesses rubbed on their knees and arms. As soon as they were done, they all hopped on a broom, took all their slippers and flew out of the window. The shepherd boy watched carefully, and finally he rubbed the ointment on himself and his stick. As soon as he was done, he whooshed right after the princesses, never letting them out of his sight. It wasn't long before the girls reached a silver forest, where they all settled down to rest. In the middle of the forest there was a silver well, with 3 silver goblets standing right next to it. The 3 princesses each had a sip of water. When they were finished, the shepherd boy collected their silver goblets and put them in his bag. He even broke off a silver twig from one of the trees. The twig rang out loud when he snapped it from the branch. The small princess was very frightened. "Why are you so scared, silly? Nobody can follow us here." So after a while, they all got on their broomsticks and flew off. They finally reached the middle of the golden forest. There was a well made of gold with 3 golden goblets standing right next to it. Each girl took a sip of water. The lad even broke a golden twig from one of the trees. The twig rang out loud when it snapped from the branch. The smallest prince was very frightened. "Don't be such a coward. There's nobody here. Who could it be anyway?" They flew off, but the shepherd was still following them. They soon arrived at the diamond forest, where there was a well made of diamonds with diamond goblets on the side. When the princesses all had their fill, the shepherd collected the goblets, broke a diamond twig, the twig rang out loud, and the smallest princess was very frightened. "Stop being scared all the time. There's nobody following us." They got on their brooms and continued their flight. Suddenly a huge gate opened up before them from somewhere below the ground. Inside there were 12 young he-devils waiting for them, and there was music playing from the attic. The shepherd boy quickly hid beneath the table, and he kept a close watch on everything. The he-devils and the girls started to dance. As the shepherd was watching a bit more closely, he noticed that the floor of the room was covered in razor blades. It was no wonder that the slippers of the princesses were worn and torn, since they were all dancing on the razor's edges. When one was torn to shreds, they just threw it away and put on a new one. When the 12 pairs of shoes were all danced to shreds, they sat down at the table. They all had a golden spoon and a fork to eat with. When one of them dropped her golden spoon, the shepherd boy quickly picked it up and put it into his bag. The other princess dropped her golden fork, and the shepherd boy picked it up and put it into his bag as well. When the girls were finally satisfied, they all hurried back home. But this time the shepherd boy flew faster because he wanted to get home first. By the time the princesses reached the royal palace, the shepherd boy was finally laying in front of their beds, pretending to be fast asleep. "He never even moved," the girls said. "Look, he's fast asleep." Morning came, and the shepherd went to see the king. The king asked him, "Well, son, have you seen anything? Have you found out anything?" "I have, your majesty. I have seen things, and I have found out things." At that point in time, the king summoned his 3 daughters, and the shepherd started to speak. First they went to a silver forest, and here is the evidence. He produced the silver goblets and the silver twig. Then they flew on to the golden forest, where they drank from their golden goblets. With that, he pulled the golden goblets and the golden twig from his bag. From there, they flew on to the diamond forest, where they drank another cup. Finally, they stopped in a palace where they danced with devils, and that's how they wore and tore all their slippers. In the meantime, they ate and drank too. One of them dropped her spoon, the other her fork. And here is the evidence, your majesty. Well done, son. The king ordered that the 2 elder daughters be locked up in the tower each night, gave his blessings to the youngest one, who married the shepherd boy. And that is how the slipper tearing came to an end. Hungarian Folk Tales. Tiny Tom and the Lily Princess. Once upon a time, far, far away, over the ocean and beyond, there lived a king, and with the king lived a queen. And they had a very tiny son. No matter how many doctors they took him to, he just wouldn't grow. Tiny he was, and tiny he remained. The king grieved much over this, the queen even more. So much so that she fell ill. On her deathbed she lay and called for the king. She said to him, "All I ask of you is that when you bury me, have a lily planted on my grave and have it guarded day and night so that no one can steal it." She spoke, and straight away she died. The king was much in grief. "If only my son were big, who can I leave my kingdom to when I am dead?" He buried his queen in pomp, wept over her, and mourned her. And he sent a proclamation across the kingdom calling for everyone who had a lily to bring it to the court so that one could be chosen for the queen's grave. They brought lilies by the cartload, but they couldn't agree which one was the finest of all. The king could hear all this uproar and went down into the courtyard. "What's all this quarrelling about?" One of the gardeners replied. "There are so many lilies here that we can hardly move, but we can't decide which one is the finest of all." "Where are you, Tiny Tom, my son? Come here and do something useful for a change. Close your eyes and pick a lily." So Tiny Tom closed his eyes and groped around like a blind man. And do you know what? The lily he picked was beautiful, and every bloom on it sparkled like a diamond. The king asked, "Who brought us this lily?" "Your Majesty, I brought it from Fairy Helen's garden." "Well then, you plant it and keep guard over it so that no one can steal it." "If you please, Your Majesty, may I ask that you send Tiny Tom with me? So if I should doze off, he'll be awake and alert." "Very well then," said the king. And so it happened. The old woman planted the flower and guarded it as if it were her life itself. So there they were, keeping guard until the old woman said, "Tiny Tom, I'm going to lie down for a while and I'll drop off to sleep. You stay guard over the lily so that no one can take it." no one can take it. You sleep well, old lady." And while Tiny Tom was keeping guard, out of nowhere appeared a little man. "Good evening, Tom. Do you know what kind of flower you're guarding here?" "Well, I know that it's a lily and it comes from Fairy Helen's garden." "You see, that lily is the princess from Dwarfland. Let me tell you. Helen once went to see the king in Dwarfland and took a great liking to the princess. So she begged the king to let her have his daughter for a week or two, and he did. Helen was envious of her beauty, and she treated the princess so badly that she wept and wept, and then she died. When she was buried, that lily grew out of her grave, and it spoke once. Take me to the grave where a mother cried as much as I did over her dwarf of a son." And when the old nurse heard this, she pulled up the lily and brought it here. But Fairy Helen's own nurse heard all of this and told Fairy Helen. Now Helen can never be at peace until the flower is stolen back from here. "Come here and I'll see to your troubles." And at that the little dwarf of a man pulled his beard from between his legs and he disappeared as if he had never been there. Tom was thinking and thinking and tried to stay awake. Suddenly he heard a fluttering and rustling. 12 fairies appeared. They made a circle around Tom, dancing, thinking that they could make him dizzy and one of them could steal the lily from the grave. But Tom was sharp. He shook the old woman awake and said, "Get up, old lady, they've come for the lily." So the old woman jumped up and took out her old spindle and then, swish, swish, she went at them. "Be off with you from here," she said, and she beat and slapped the fairies until they flew off back to Fairyland without the lily. There they told Fairy Helen that they had failed to bring the lily with them. Now she had a 7-legged horse and she mounted it and off she went. Now as Tiny Tom was keeping guard, he suddenly heard a voice. "Tom, I think they're going to take me away. Fairy Helen is coming." And out of the lily there came a tiny young woman, more beautiful and radiant than the golden sun itself. Tom, if only I had my butterfly carriage for us to fly away in." And at the very moment she said that, 6 butterflies came flying there, drawing a fine carriage. The dwarf princess asked, "Will you come with me, Tom?" "Of course I will. Never will I part from you." Up they went, up and up, into the bright blue sky. The princess turned and said, "Tom, look back and tell me what you see. Oh, it's Fairy Helen. Don't let her catch up with us." Up and up they flew as fast could be. Suddenly a huge sheet of flame came licking at Tom's back. "Tom, look back and tell me what you see now. Oh, it's Fairy Helen. Her horse's breath is aflame and I can feel its heat. Just let us get up between the sun and the stars and the moon, for up there she has no powers." Now when they reached Dwarfland, the joy was great indeed. So pleased was the king to see his long-lost daughter that he swept her into his arms and covered her in kisses. He did the same with Tom. He said straight away that he would give his daughter's hand to Tom and make him king of the land. Then came the great wedding feast. There was no end to the dwarfs there, each one more handsome than the next, and everybody lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. How I passed my childhood. Now, when I was born and all of 6 weeks old, out I went into the street on a hot summer's day, and I met a true old friend of mine who was a bottle ahead of me and tipsy with it. So we made a pair of oxen out of mud, a cart and sacks to load onto the cart to take them off to the mill and grind them. And off we went. Now, in those days there was a water mill to do the milling, but it wasn't there. The miller was strolling up and down on the water, and so we asked him to call up the mill, and he waved for it and shouted until up it came and we could start to mill away. Now, the miller man didn't have a scoop, so he pulled off my head and used that as a scoop. So when we were finished and off I went on my way home, who did I meet but a shower of women and young ones who started to laugh at me. "What are you laughing at?" says I. "Ah, you don't have a head," says they. And that's how I knew I'd left my head behind in the mill. Back I went, put the head onto my neck, and off for home again. But the women and the young ones were laughing at me again. "Now what are you laughing at?" says I. "Isn't your nose at the back of your head?" says they. So I gave my head a good twist to set it right and off for home again. Now that's when I remembered that I'd stuck my whip into the ground behind the mill pond. Back I went, but when I got there, what did I see but that a great big tree had shot up from it and my old whip was up at the top. So up and up I climbed, and there at the top, what did I find but a hawk chasing a whole cloud of little birds, trying to catch them any way at all. Straight away the little birds, one and all, flew right up my sleeves, into my shirt, and right up my legs, into my breeches. Quick as a flash I tied up my sleeves and breeches, and wasn't I happy that I'd caught so many birds. Yes, indeed. And all these birds in my shirt and breeches started off chirping and tweeting, and all of them giving off in their own language, until up they flew with me and carried me off far, far away. I saw the women washing and scrubbing down on the edge of the sea. They looked up and shouted out, "Look at that big bird!" But I thought I heard them say, "Loosen your shirt!" So that's what I did, and out flew the birds, and down I plopped into the sea. I made such a big splash that I emptied out all the water, and the fishes were all left around me. So I gathered up a fine lot of them. I didn't waste any more time there because I was far from home. So I set off back through Hotland. Now, Hotland is a strange country indeed, where they don't build their houses on the ground, but up in the air at the height of a man. So they need ladders to get in. The people in Hotland are all big and tall, and everything is big. Even the church was so big that there were 4 soldiers in there on a horseback, and when the priest chanted, "The Lord be with you," one of the soldiers spurred his horse and off he went, and he intoned it to the second soldier to the third to the fourth, and he sang it to the respondent. So long was the Mass that the congregation could have done with a good breakfast, but that was no problem at all, since the altar was made of ham and the candles were sausages. And just as big and tall was the steeple of the church. When 2 carpenters were building it, they dropped their hatchets, and by the time one of them fell to the earth, it had rotted away. And when the second was in the air, a lark nested in it, and before it reached the ground, it had laid its eggs and raised its chicks. The bell was so large, the only way they could get it into the belfry was to carry it up when it was a baby and let it grow up there. It was hotter than hot there, so hot that all they did was slaughter a pig, put it in a pan, and put the pan out of the window, and straight away they had roast pork. But I didn't waste too much time there either. I'd had enough and continued on my way home. That's how I got to Cold Land. It was so cold there that the white of an egg would freeze so brightly that you could read a newspaper by its light. You couldn't speak there unless you could read, because when a man said a word, it straight away froze in front of him and the other had to read it. But I didn't waste too much time in Cold Land. On I went, on my way home. By the end, I was getting so fed up with the journey that I stuck my whip into the earth and climbed up to the heavens. And there was my grandmother. "The best of the day to you, Grandma. Do you have some bread and jam for me?" "Oh dear, son," says she, "up here we don't really eat." "You don't? Then how do I get down from here quickly?" Then an old man arrived and I told him as well that I wanted to get back down because there was no bread and jam to be had here at all. The old man remembered that they had a chest of bran and we twisted a rope out of that. I could lower myself down. And as true as I'm here, we plaited it fine enough, but a mouse somehow got into it, and when I was lowering myself back down, that little mouse bit right through the rope, and I plopped down into the ground. I thought I was in the old town somewhere near the church, but I wasn't. I was at the edge of the new town, and I was well and truly drilled into the earth, so I shouted out for them to dig me out, but no one came. So I had to go home for a spade and dig myself out. And that's all I remember of my own younger days and how I passed them.